Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the sit down. It's been a few days since I've been on here because I've been off gallivanting as per usual. This time it was in Istanbul, which I have to say is a really, really cool city, actually. If you haven't been, I would highly, highly recommend it. I was there for a few days visiting the city and catching up with my dad, which means that I've been away from you guys, which is the only downside. But we're here today, and I want to get into the heavyweight division, which now looks like it is opening up and becoming really juicy, really spicy, and lots of things have been happening. And I want to talk to you guys all about it. But before I do, as always, please may I ask you to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And also, please do hype the video. Okay, where to begin? Where to begin? Firstly, I think it's important to say that after much rumors and circulation about who the potential Tyson Fury opponent was going to be, I think it took a lot of people by surprise to find out that he was facing quite an unknown entity whose name I'm not even going to attempt because I always seem to butcher names and it's not a good look. So he's facing quite an unknown entity. But what I do know about the fight is that it's taking place in Thailand in July. So there's some things about that which I'm like, okay, yeah, cool. I can see how that's played out in that way. Mainly the fact that he's been training out in Thailand. And so this feels like, I don't know, I guess like a good step for him in some way, some capacity, maybe a sense of familiarity of environment. I don't really know. But what I do know is that I think that the opponent is a little bit disappointing. I know that it's meant to be some type of, warm up fight, but I'm sure this is the same guy that was stood at the end of his last fight saying that he didn't need a warm up fight for Anthony Joshua. But hey, who am I to judge? I'm not judge and jury. So yeah, that's happening with Tyson Fury. Cool. Moving on to kind of more exciting things in the heavyweight division. Not to be too opinionated about it, but yeah, pretty exciting is the fact that obviously Alexander Usyk vacated all of his belts, right? He vacated all of his belts very, very recently. And that was mostly, I guess, because the WBC were ordering him to face his mandatory in Ajit Kabayel. For whatever reason, I guess he didn't think that that was a fight that he wanted to take, whether or not he thought it was because it wasn't worthwhile or whether he just didn't feel up to it because obviously Ajit Kabayel is a really good body puncher. Who knows? Only him and his team. But either way, he vacated the belts. And since then, quite a lot has been happening. So firstly, we've seen that the IBF has now officially ordered Moses Itauma versus Sanchez. Now, this is interesting. It's really interesting because when this fight was ordered a year ago, Moses Itauma and his team turned it down. And, a lot of people at the time were speculating that it was because in some way he was trying to duck Usyk because I think Sanchez was the mandatory in the IBF to face Usyk after. But I don't really think it was that. I think actually it was more the fact that he just didn't feel ready at the time. Like he's so young. He's still so young. He was even younger then. And perhaps he wanted to have a few more testing fights, which makes total sense because obviously he'd barely spent any number of rounds in the ring up until that point. Since then, I mean, he's not really spent any longer in the ring. He's been in there for he's had an extra 5 rounds since that time till now. And that was when he put Jermaine Franklin down in 5 rounds, someone who'd never been stopped before. But obviously that was a good learning fight for him. Franklin obviously hadn't been stopped by the likes of Dillian Whyte, Anthony Joshua. So that felt like quite a big tick in his favour. What I think is quite interesting about this whole thing is that obviously now the IBF have ordered this fight, but only last week, I believe, it was announced that he officially announced that he was going to be facing Filip Hrgović in August. And it was something that had been circulating around the rumour mill. I think he even alluded to it in his post-fight interview after Jermaine Franklin, that was a fight that was really intriguing to him. But now that kind of feels like It kind of feels like a unnecessary risk, I guess. Like if you were going to look at it in that way from like a business perspective, it does feel like a bit of an unnecessary risk in the fact that you now have an opportunity for a world title with your opponent being Sanchez. Filip Hrgović, he's not a pushover, he's not a joke. Does that feel now like an unnecessary risk, and how are we going to navigate that process? That would be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how that all pans out. I believe that the teams are in talks at the moment about it. So yeah, we'll keep our ears to the ground on that one. But with this vacating, oh, I shouldn't say vacation, vacating of the belts that Usyk has done, what's also happened is that Gassiev has now been elevated to full WBA champion. So he was meant to be fighting Tony Yoka. Tony Yoka's had to pull out because of an injury. But in the lieu of that, Gassiev has now been elevated to full WBA champion. Now, if I'm Moses Itauma and I'm looking at a route to becoming a world champion, or rather I should say, if I was Moses Itauma's team, or if I was Frank Warren and I was looking at a route, I'm kind of leaning more towards wanting to take the Gassiev fight over the Sanchez fight. But hey, I don't know exactly, where the chips are going to fall on that one. And I don't know what him and his team have in mind or what they have planned. But it's a really, really interesting position to be in, for Moses Itauma specifically, because it's like, now that the belts have all been vacated, it feels like there's kind of this fresh blood in the heavyweight scene, and I think it's been needed. There is still a part of me that feels quite sad about the fact that, Usyk, the man, the legend Usyk, is retiring eventually, and that he's vacated the belts, etc. But I also think it's just breathed a bit of life back into the heavyweight division. It was starting to feel really stagnant. But either way, there was a bit of speculation after he vacated the belts as to who he wanted to fight for his, his last dance, as he's labelled it. I mean, we'll see if it is actually going to be his last dance. But there was a bit of speculation about who he wanted to fight. And it appears, from what I've read anyway, it appears that him and, I should say his team are in talks with Zuffa Boxing to see if he can get the fight over the line with Deontay Wilder, which I guess for him would then, tick off the big hitter names for his legacy sheet. And I know that is something that, he wanted to do. I mean, although he's not come out and said it in that way, but he expressed such an interest in fighting Deontay Wilder at this stage in Wilder's career, when he's over the hill, let's be honest. And, your logical side kind of says, okay, well, that's most likely going to be, because when people look back at his career and his resume in 10, 15 years, he's going to want to say that he fought and beat all of the big names. And Wilder, of course, for his era and his generation, is part of that. So let's see what happens with that. Guys, I'm interested to know from you, as always, if you're Moses Itauma, what are you doing? What are you doing? Is Sanchez the fight that you now want to take on and potentially get the IBF? Would you be more interested in fighting Gassiev for the WBA? Where does this Filip Hrgović fight sit with you now? Let me know in the comments your thoughts about how the heavyweight division is looking. And as always, please do comment, like, share and subscribe. And I look forward to catching you next time on The Sit Down.